Okay, in case you missed the review session on Saturday or you didn't see my Instagram live review session, I'm cool like that. Here's your chance to review for those of you who will be taking my test on Tuesday. So, Mr. Ali's homeroom, Ms. Hood's homeroom, since I'm getting these videos up kind of late, this will be best served for you guys. And it's cool. We got this. We're going to start with Standard 31A. I'm not going to read every standard, don't worry, you can read it yourself. Where we're going to talk about the Mississippian Indians. Now, there's only one question on the Mississippian Indians, so really focus on their culture. They lived in large towns and villages. They were very advanced. They had large palisades or wooden fences surrounding their villages. Some even had moats. Pretty sure there were no gators in them, though. This wasn't a medieval castle. But they were protecting themselves from outsiders, because as these villages and towns were established, the Mississippian Indians started creating separate cultures. This is when tribes were formed. This is when people, Native American groups, created their own religious customs and traditions. Started wearing headdresses, had tattoos, some had pierced ears. This is when a lot of those rituals and styles of dress and all that we know of when we think of Native Americans happened, because they were staying in one place. They were able to develop this culture. As far as food goes, now we know that all of those big mammals were extinct. We're moving on up, and we now only have small mammals left. We have deer, we have muskrat, rabbits, probably squirrels. They would hunt turkey, they would fish, they would still gather nuts and berries. But one of the interesting things about the Mississippian Indians is that they were the first to use horticulture or garden cultivation. They would grow crops. They would grow squash, corn. They were also very intelligent about how they did that. They would diversify their crops so that everything would grow better. They didn't just have rows of corn and rows of squash. They'd mix it all together. And a lot of the Europeans who came to the New World, not so much in Georgia, but in some of the northern colonies, learned how to grow crops from the Native Americans. Excuse me. The Native Americans living during the Mississippian era also used more advanced weapons and tools. Spears and bow and arrows and all were already developed, but they also had learned how to take different types of rock and use them and bone and different types of stone and sharpen them into tools. Chert knives, and that is C-H-E-R-T, were very, very popular during this time period because chert was a type of rock that was hard enough to be both dangerous and effective as a tool, but soft enough where you could use a harder stone to make those arrow points. And their shelter was also advanced. They called them wattle and daub shelters. Basically, they were huts that would have a roof, but they would be insulated. They would use clay, and they would use sticks, and they would use maybe like wheatgrass as like insulation, and they would build these huts that would stay warm in the winter, but would also stay cold in the summer. But the thing about the shelter with the Mississippians is that they lived in them to sleep. Other than that, they were out working. This was a very active culture. Their large villages and towns were also full of flat-top burial mounds. You can see that in the picture. And these mounds were also found at city centers. These villages would have these plazas, basically, where rituals would take place, and where the groups of people would meet. So the Mississippians were the most advanced culture of this time. That didn't really make sense. They were the most advanced Native American culture up to this time. The Mississippians, remember, weren't really one group of people. It's really describing the era. And one of the reasons why they're called Mississippians is because a lot of these Native American groups would form on rivers like the Mississippi, because in order to be able to have horticulture or garden cultivation, you needed to be near water sources. So most of these Native American groups would find a source of water in order to build a successful village. And they were also ruled by a priest chief. And this last bit about the Mississippians, it was a chiefdom. Instead of a kingdom, we have a chiefdom. Not a king or queen in charge, but a priest chief. This was someone who was both seen as wise, but also as like a warrior, a person that was a go-to guy for all of your problems. Now, next. Excuse me, guys. The Spanish. Spanish were the first Europeans to have contact with these Indians in Georgia. Hernando de Soto, who I'll talk about in just a minute, sorry, I'm getting distracted because my cat is scratching on the door and she wants in. I might have to go to the door. He led an expedition through the southeast, and what they were looking for was gold, God, and glory. You guys all remember the 3 G's from, I believe, 6th grade. They wanted to spread their religion, they wanted to find gold and riches, and they wanted glory. They wanted to conquer land. And when we say conquer, we mean take over the land. They did this in South America. They did this in Central America. They did not have as much success in North America. And the person who led these expeditions through Georgia was the first European explorer to come to Georgia, Hernando de Soto. His missions failed, even though, as you can see in this painting from when the Spanish destroyed the Muskogee villages, they did not conquer Georgia and settle it. They did establish Spanish missions, churches on the barrier islands that would try to spread the Catholic faith. The Native Americans were very hesitant to even give it a shot. But what the Spanish did do in Georgia was kill thousands of Native Americans and give thousands of Native Americans smallpox. Native Americans died of disease just as much, if not more, than being died by a gun or a sword from the Spanish. The Spanish did have more advanced weapons, but a lot of Native Americans held their own fighting against them. But smallpox wiped out thousands of Native Americans. Their immune systems could not fight it off because they had never been introduced to those diseases before. So that's one of the reasons why it just wiped them out. Remember, this was the time before medicines, before people could go to the store and get an antibiotic to fight off something. Your body just had to fight it off on its own. And they were unable to do that. So the big impact between the Mississippians and the Spanish is that when the Mississippians had contact with De Soto and the other Spanish explorers, death and destruction is really all that happened. De Soto did not find gold. A lot of Native Americans would lie to him about where the gold was. And then they'd go back and destroy their villages, and Native Americans contracted smallpox and other diseases and weren't able to make it. And this is one of the reasons why tribes at this time reorganized into groups like the Creek and the Cherokee. Because so many people died, they had to basically form new alliances as tribes and create these new tribes of Native Americans in order to survive. Now, the reason why the British came to Georgia was because they wanted to settle the area. They already had 12 other colonies. We were the 13th colony. And in South Carolina, you had a lot of success with plantations. They were already bringing in lots and lots of money, resources. And Great Britain knew that the more colonies you have, the more resources you get. A colony is land that is controlled or owned by a mother country, a larger country. And normally colonies were established in places that were either full of, like, I guess you could say more of like a tribe type system. A lot of places in the New World, a lot of colonies that were established in Africa, you didn't have really countries per se, you didn't have a lot of boundaries, you had smaller groups of tribes, and they were seen as primitive by the Europeans. Even though their cultures were still advanced in their own ways, Europeans saw them as being less than, and they thought it would be okay to take over their lands. So in Georgia, that happened, and we'll talk about in another video how they pushed all the Native Americans out of Georgia. But the reasons why Great Britain established Georgia in the Charter of 1732: philanthropy, or charity; economics; and defense. Philanthropy, charity. They were giving away land. People who came to Georgia were poor. They needed a second chance. And they were given 50 acres of land, a year's supply of food, a year's supply of supplies like farming equipment. Economics. The second reason why we were established as a colony, just go back to mercantilism. That is the word you need to know. Mercantilism is when a colony provides goods and resources to the mother country so they have more exports. So they're making more money because they're exporting more goods, fewer imports. They didn't have to rely on other countries as much because the colonies are going to make those goods, grow those goods, find those resources for the mother country. And defense. The Spanish were still in Florida at this time. And in South Carolina, you had very lucrative plantations. Plantations that were bringing in a lot of revenue for the British government. So they wanted to have a buffer colony between Florida, Spanish Florida, and the British in South Carolina to protect them. And as a buffer colony, that was really the only way that Georgia during the trustee period was successful. Because we did not grow any of the crops that the trustees wanted us to successfully. Now, the trustees were James Oglethorpe and 20 other men. James Oglethorpe was the only trustee who came to Georgia, which is one reason why people respected him so much. And he formed a great friendship with Chief Tomochichi of the Yamacraw Indians. The Yamacraw were a part of the Creek Indians, by the way. And they established peace. Unlike other colonies where there was a lot of fighting between Native Americans and the English settlers, they had a lot of success with peace negotiations for a couple of reasons. One, from the get-go, Tomochichi basically said, hey man, you can have Yamacraw Bluff, we'll move our people upstream and you can establish your city here, which became Savannah. But also because of Mary Musgrove, the translator for James Oglethorpe, who was half Creek Indian, half British, could speak both languages, and these three people really helped establish peacetime during the trustee colony of Georgia. We're going to go ahead and stop right there so that we can really take our time on learning about the immigrants during trustee Georgia. But just remember that James Oglethorpe was not the only person running Georgia, but he was seen as the founder or the father of Georgia because he was the only trustee who came over to Georgia. The rest were just in England with their pinkies up, drinking their tea, sitting pretty. But James Oglethorpe actually helped make things happen. Another quick fact about Savannah. I'm not sure if they'll ask this on the test, but just in case, Savannah was known for its grid system, its squares. If you look at the image on the slide, you can see that Savannah was a very well laid out city, and even today it is well known for its grid system, its squares. Alright, next video we'll finish up the colonial period of Georgia and keep it moving.